Cash was changing hands in my driveway. A stranger held my husband's drill like it was something he'd owned forever. Another guy tested the weight of a toolbox and nodded. My neighbors stood around in lawn chairs watching like it was free entertainment, and my daughter-in-law stood at the center of it all, smiling. I didn't say a word. I stood there with grocery bags cutting into my fingers, keys still dangling, staring as pieces of my late husband's life were lined up on folding tables with blue tape and handwritten prices. $5, $10, best offer. Someone picked up his wrench set, the one he cleaned every Sunday night. A man handed over cash without even looking at me. My daughter-in-law laughed, loud, comfortable. She never asked me, not once. People whispered, someone shook their head, a woman muttered, "That's messed up." I didn't argue, I didn't grab anything back, I didn't stop her, I just stood there and watched. 11 items, one driveway. And strangers were carrying my husband's tools toward their cars. Finally, she noticed me. "Oh, hey," she said like this was normal. "We're just clearing space." Clearing space, I nodded once. Slow, she took that nod and ran with it. "Your son said it was fine," she added. "He said you wouldn't mind." I bent down and picked up one small metal box from the edge of the table. Scratched, dented, no price tag, she didn't even look at it. No one did. Before I tell you what happened next, let me introduce myself. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and for 38 years, I was married to the man whose tools were being sold in my driveway like yard clutter. I'm sharing this because moments like this don't always look big when they happen, but they change how you see people forever. If something like this has ever hit close to home for you, I'm curious to know as well. Where are you watching this from right now? Tell me in the comments. If this kind of story speaks to you, staying connected helps more than you think. A quick subscribe just means you don't miss the next one when it shows up. A few weeks before that afternoon, people kept telling me the same thing. "Let us help, don't worry about anything. We'll handle it." My son said it first, then my daughter-in-law repeated it, always with confidence. They started coming by more, opening closets, standing in the garage longer than necessary. Comments slipped out casually. "You don't need all this anymore. We should clear some space." I told myself they meant well. I told myself grief was making me sensitive. I didn't question why my daughter-in-law already sounded so sure. I didn't question why decisions were being discussed without me. I thought letting go would bring peace. I didn't know things were already being sorted. I didn't know conversations were already happening. And I didn't realize my driveway was being measured in her head. I bent down and picked up one small metal box from the edge of the table. That small metal box in my hand, the one he always kept on the top shelf behind the paint cans, the one he told me about years ago and said, "Don't lose this." He told me, "If anything ever feels off, this is the first thing you grab." I never thought I'd need it. But standing there in my driveway, I finally understood why he'd been so careful. That was something she never planned for, and without knowing it yet, she had already made her biggest mistake. After that day, the house didn't feel the same. Not broken, just shifted. The garage door stayed closed more often. The shelves looked emptier than I remembered. And every time I walked past the driveway, I could still see where the folding tables had been, like shadows that wouldn't fade. My daughter-in-law acted normal, too normal. She brought over coffee the next morning, asked if I'd slept okay, talked about grocery prices and traffic like nothing had happened. She never mentioned the sale, not once. My son stayed quiet too. He avoided my eyes, answered questions with half sentences, and kept checking his phone like it might save him. I didn't push. I didn't ask where the money went. I didn't ask who decided what got sold. I didn't ask why my husband's things were treated like clutter instead of memories. Silence felt safer. At night, I sat alone in the living room, the TV on low, holding that small metal box in my lap. I hadn't opened it yet. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I knew once I did, things would start moving. That box had always been my husband's just in case. He kept it locked, kept it hidden, and kept reminding me where it was just in case something ever happened. I thought just in case meant emergencies, hospital stuff, paperwork. I didn't think it meant this. A few days later, my daughter-in-law came by again. This time she walked straight into the garage like she owned it. "We should probably finish clearing this out," she said casually. "HOA's been cracking down, neighbors complain." I looked at her, really looked, she wasn't asking. She was informing. "I'll handle it," I said. Her smile stiffened. "Oh, I just figured," I said. "I'll handle it." She laughed lightly like I was joking, but her eyes stayed sharp. That was new. Later that week, I noticed something else. The garage inventory list taped to the wall. Neat handwriting. Itemized. Prices written in pencil, then erased and rewritten. I didn't recognize the handwriting. It wasn't mine. And it wasn't my husband's. I took the paper down and folded it into my pocket. No confrontation, no questions, just information. That night I finally opened the metal box. Inside were documents, old ones, originals, titles, receipts. A notarized letter, and something else, something I hadn't looked at in years because I trusted the man I married to handle it. The house. Not just the deed, the structure of ownership. I sat there for a long time, reading everything twice. Then a third time, my heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, everything suddenly made sense. The confidence, the assumptions, the way my daughter-in-law spoke like she already had authority. She thought she knew what mattered. She thought she knew what she could sell. She didn't know what my husband had protected. The next morning I made a phone call, just one. I didn't accuse anyone, I didn't explain the situation, I simply asked a question. And the woman on the other end went quiet for a second before saying, "Oh yes, that changes things." That's when I knew something was already in motion. And my daughter-in-law had no idea she'd started a chain reaction she couldn't stop. The woman on the phone didn't rush me, that told me everything. People who deal with bad news every day usually talk fast, try to soften it, or jump straight to advice. She did none of that. She just let the silence sit there, like she was giving me space to catch up to what I'd just uncovered. "I think we should schedule a time to go over this in person," she said finally. "There are some details you'll want to hear directly." I agreed. No questions, no emotion in my voice. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the grain in the wood. My husband had built that table himself. Every scratch had a story. Every dent had a reason. I thought about how many times my daughter-in-law had leaned against it lately, scrolling her phone, talking about simplifying and downsizing. She had no idea what she was leaning on. Over the next few days, things around the house kept shifting. Not physically this time, socially. My son called more, asked how I was doing, offered to take care of errands. My daughter-in-law texted links to estate sale companies and donation centers. Helpful, efficient, relentless, I responded politely. Short messages, neutral tone, no yes, no no, just enough to keep them comfortable. At night, I reread the papers from the metal box. I noticed things I'd skimmed past before, dates. Signatures, the way my husband had underlined certain clauses like he wanted to make sure no one missed them. He'd been quiet like this too. Observant, prepared. That Friday I drove downtown for the appointment. The office was small, clean. No fancy art on the walls. Just framed certificates and a woman who looked like she'd seen every version of family conflict possible. She laid the documents out carefully, like they were fragile. "Your husband was very intentional," she said. "He made sure certain assets couldn't be transferred or sold without your direct approval. I nodded. She slid one paper forward. This includes the garage and everything in it. There it was. Simple, clear, undeniable, the sale, the assumptions, the confidence. None of it mattered. My daughter-in-law didn't have the authority she thought she did, and my son never had it either. What happens now? I asked. That depends on what you want, she said. But there's something else. She hesitated before continuing. Some items were sold without permission. That creates a problem, not for you. She didn't need to finish that sentence. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter-in-law. Hey, we're thinking of doing another little sale this weekend. Way less stuff this time. Just trying to help. Smiling face with smiling eyes. I stared at the screen. She was still smiling, still confident. Still unaware that her version of the story was already falling apart. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled into my driveway and noticed something new. Fresh chalk markings on the concrete, measurements. Someone had been planning. I walked into the garage and looked around. More empty shelves, more gaps. She hadn't waited. She had moved ahead without me. That night I didn't sleep much, not because I was angry. Because I finally understood the difference between grief and clarity. Grief makes you quiet because you're tired. Clarity makes you quiet because you're focused. And I was done being confused. The next step wasn't about stopping her. It was about letting her keep going, just long enough to finish what she started. By Monday morning, nobody said the word sale out loud. They didn't need to. The house told the story for them. The garage shelves were barer than they'd been the day before, gaps where things used to sit. Dust outlines shaped like tools that hadn't moved in years. Someone had been busy, quiet about it, confident enough not to ask. My daughter-in-law didn't call, didn't text. That alone was strange. She was the kind of person who filled silence fast, jokes, updates, plans. When she went quiet, it meant she was watching instead of talking. My son called once, let it ring twice, then hung up. I went about my day like nothing had changed. I folded laundry, watered the plants, walked past the garage without stopping, but I noticed everything. Around noon, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Thick paper, inside was a receipt, one of my husband's tools, sold for cash. Stapled to it was a short note from the office downtown. Unauthorized sale confirmed. Please keep this for your records, unauthorized. I sat at the kitchen table and read that word over and over again. Not angry, not shocked, grounded. I placed the receipt inside the metal box and closed the lid carefully. The sound it made felt final, like something locking into place. That afternoon, my daughter-in-law finally called. Her voice was lighter than it should have been. Hey, just checking in, she said. Everything okay? Yes, I said, a pause. You've been really quiet. So have you? Another pause, shorter this time. Well, things have been hectic, she said. You know how it is. I did. I'm heading out for a bit, I added. I won't be reachable. Oh, she said. Okay, she didn't ask where, she didn't say how long, she just said, all right, and hung up. That evening my son stopped by. No warning, no excuses. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. You doing okay? He asked. I am, he nodded, eyes dropping to the floor. We didn't mean to overstep, that was new. You didn't step, I said, you crossed. He swallowed. I just thought with everything going on, I know what you thought. He didn't argue. That silence told me more than any apology could have. After he left, I went back to the documents in the metal box. Slower this time, more careful. That's when I noticed the clause I'd skimmed past before. Short, clear, any property sold without my written consent could be legally reversed. Even cash sales, even private transactions. I sat back in my chair and exhaled, not relief. Readiness. The next morning I made 2 calls. One to the same office downtown, and one to a number my husband had written in the margin of a document years ago, with 3 words next to it, if you need this. By the time I hung up, I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't reacting, I was choosing. My daughter-in-law still thought this was about space, about stuff, about control slipping quietly into her hands. She didn't know the rules had already been written, and she definitely didn't know how close she was to finding that out the hard way. The calls I made started working faster than I expected. Not in a loud way, in a paperwork way. The kind of movement you don't see unless you know what to look for. That Tuesday, I got an email confirming something had been flagged. No explanation, no drama, just a notice that certain transactions were now under review. I printed it out and slid it into the metal box with the others. My daughter-in-law showed up that afternoon without warning, not smiling this time. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, scanning the counters like she was checking inventory. "Everything okay?" she asked again. "Yes," I said, still calm. She nodded slowly like she was filing that answer away. "I noticed some things were moved," she said carefully. "From the garage, I noticed that too." Her jaw tightened for half a second before she caught herself. "Well, I just wanted to make sure you didn't feel overwhelmed," she said. "There's a lot to deal with, I agree." She waited for more, nothing came. That silence did something to her, I could see it. She shifted her weight, glanced at the hallway, then back at me. "You know," she added, "sometimes it helps to let go of things." I looked at her. "Sometimes," I said, "and sometimes it helps to know exactly what you're holding." She frowned, confused. That was the first crack. After she left, I sat alone and thought about how easy it is for people to mistake quiet for weakness. If you've ever had someone talk around you like that, making decisions, explaining your own life to you, you probably know the feeling. That moment where you wonder if you're being too passive, or if you're just the only one paying attention. I'm curious how you see it. Do you speak up right away, or do you wait until you understand the whole picture? Either way, moments like that stick with you. And if stories like this feel familiar, tapping like or staying subscribed just makes sure you don't miss the next one when it shows up. By Thursday, the tone shifted again. My son called and actually stayed on the line this time. "Did you talk to anyone?" he asked. "About what?" "The garage," he said quickly. "I talked to who I needed to." Silence. "That's vague," he said. "So was what happened." He exhaled, long and slow. "We might have messed up," he admitted. I didn't respond, because admitting it and fixing it are two very different things. Friday morning, a neighbor knocked on my door. She looked uncomfortable. "I just wanted to ask," she said, lowering her voice, "about that sale last week. Everything okay with it?" "Yes," I said, "it's being handled." Her relief was visible. That told me word had started spreading, not accusations. Questions, the kind that make people nervous. That afternoon, I got another call from the office downtown. "This is moving forward," the woman said. "You should be prepared for some pushback." I am. When I hung up, I didn't feel anxious. I felt steady. My daughter-in-law still thought this was something she could explain away. Smooth over. Talk through. She didn't realize explanations only work when you actually have authority. And that was slipping out of her hands, one quiet confirmation at a time. The pushback started small, not yelling, not threats, questions. My daughter-in-law texted me early Saturday morning. "Hey, did anyone call you about the tools?" "Someone's asking for receipts." I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and finished my coffee. A few minutes later, another message came through. "It's probably nothing, just checking." I didn't respond. By noon, my son called. His voice was tight, like he'd been rehearsing. "Did you sign anything recently?" he asked. "No." Another pause. "Because someone said there might be a mix-up with ownership," he added. "They're asking for proof." "I'm sure they are." He went quiet. "You could have told us," he said finally. I looked out the window at the driveway, empty now, clean, like nothing had ever happened there. "I could have," I said. "You could have asked." That ended the call. That afternoon, I drove to the office downtown again. Same building, same calm energy. The woman greeted me with a nod and slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of notices already sent out. Formal, neutral, unemotional, but clear. Any buyers of the sold items would be contacted. Refunds would be arranged. Items would be returned or compensated through proper channels. "And your daughter-in-law?" I asked. "She'll be notified as well," the woman said. "Her name appears on the point-of-sale notes." I nodded. No satisfaction, just confirmation. On the way home, I stopped by the garage. For the first time in days, I let myself stand there and feel it. The emptiness, the quiet. My husband's presence was still there in the oil stains and uneven shelves. That mattered more than the things ever did. That evening, my daughter-in-law showed up again. This time, she didn't come inside, she stood on the porch. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "No," I replied, "there's been an assumption," she swallowed. "We were just trying to help," she repeated. "I know," I said, "and help doesn't start with deciding for someone else." She looked past me like she expected my son to appear and back her up. He didn't. She left without another word. That night, I placed the metal box back on the top shelf in the garage, behind the paint cans. Exactly where it belonged. Not because I was done, but because I didn't need to hold it anymore. The process had started. And it wasn't in my hands now, it was in systems, paper trails, records, notices sent and received. The kind of things you can't argue with. The next week was going to change how my daughter-in-law looked at that driveway forever. She just didn't know it yet, and when she finally understood, it wouldn't come from me. Monday came with a knock at the door. Not my daughter-in-law, not my son. Two people I didn't recognize, polite, professional. They introduced themselves, handed me paperwork, and asked if they could confirm a few details about the property. I invited them in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one my husband built, and went through the documents slowly. They asked simple questions. I gave simple answers. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. When they left, one of them said, "Thank you for your cooperation." Cooperation. That word followed me all day. By the afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls, texts, voicemails, all from my son I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a process. That evening, my daughter-in-law sent a message longer than any she'd ever sent before. She explained, clarified, justified. She used words like miscommunication and good intentions. She didn't use the word permission once. I read it, then I deleted it. Tuesday, a certified letter arrived, addressed to her. I watched from the window as she opened it on the porch. I didn't hear what it said. I didn't need to. Her posture changed. The confidence drained out of her shoulders like air from a tire. She read it twice. Then she looked at the driveway. The same driveway she'd turned into a marketplace. Later that night, my son came over again. He didn't knock this time. He just stood there, keys in his hand, looking tired. "They're asking questions," he said, "serious ones." "Yes," I replied. "About the sale, about authority." "About the house," I nodded. He ran a hand through his hair. "She didn't know," he said quietly. "I believe that," I said, "but not knowing isn't the same as not being responsible." He didn't argue. That was becoming a pattern. Over the next few days, things unraveled quickly. Buyers were contacted, refunds discussed, items tracked down. Neighbors started asking questions, not gossip, concern. One woman stopped me while I was checking the mail. "I just wanted to say," she said, "I'm glad you're handling it." Handling it, I smiled politely. Friday afternoon, my daughter-in-law finally asked the one question she should have asked from the start. "What do you want to do now?" I took a moment before answering. "I want things put back the way they were," I said, "and I want clear boundaries going forward." She nodded. Slow, careful, for the first time she wasn't leading. She was following. That weekend, trucks came and went. Items returned, money exchanged. The driveway filled up again, not with strangers but with quiet corrections. No signs, no prices, just restitution. And as I stood there watching, I realized something. The humiliation wasn't in what she'd done. It was in watching it undone, right in front of the same neighbors who'd once stood there with cash in their hands. And it wasn't over yet. By the time Monday rolled back around, the driveway looked familiar again. Not perfect, not untouched, but corrected. Toolboxes were back on the shelves. The workbench had its weight again. Even the oil stain on the concrete felt less exposed, like it wasn't being stared at anymore. My daughter-in-law avoided the house. That was new. She used to move through it like she belonged there, opening cabinets, shifting things, making suggestions without waiting for answers. Now she stayed in the car when my son stopped by. Windows up, engine running, watching. My son came in alone. He didn't bring excuses this time. "They're asking her to document everything," he said quietly. "Dates, buyers." "Amounts," I nodded. "That's standard," I said. He leaned against the counter, tired. "She's embarrassed." I looked at him. "So am I." He flinched slightly, like that hadn't occurred to him. The following days were quiet but tense. Messages went through lawyers and offices now, not family group chats. Everything slowed down in a way that made each step heavier. That's how real consequences move. Slow, deliberate, unavoidable. One afternoon, I heard voices outside. I looked through the window and saw two neighbors standing with my daughter-in-law near the driveway. One of them was holding a tool I recognized instantly. My husband's old socket set. She was explaining something, hands moving fast. Words spilling over each other. The neighbor handed it back without smiling. I didn't step outside. I didn't need to. Later that evening, my daughter-in-law knocked on the door, soft this time. When I opened it, she didn't look angry or confident or defensive. She looked small. "I should have asked," she said. "Yes, you should have," I replied. She swallowed. "I didn't mean to disrespect you." "I know," I said. "But intention doesn't erase impact." She nodded slowly, like she was hearing that for the first time. "I was wrong," she added. I let the silence sit, because apologies don't need encouragement. "I won't touch anything again without your say," she said. "That's a start," I replied. She left without another word. That night, I went into the garage alone and sat on the small stool my husband used when his knees hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't reminisce. I just sat there, surrounded by things that were never meant to be sold by strangers. The metal box stayed where it was, top shelf behind the paint cans. Unopened now, unneeded, it had done its job. What surprised me most wasn't how quickly the situation flipped. It was how differently people treated me once they realized I wasn't confused. Neighbors spoke slower. My son listened more. My daughter-in-law measured her words like they mattered. Nothing about me had changed. Only their assumptions had. By the end of the week, the paperwork phase was nearly complete. Refunds issued, notices resolved. Quiet confirmations sent and received. The driveway was no longer a stage, but something else was coming. Not loud, not dramatic. A moment where lines would be drawn clearly enough that no one could pretend they didn't see them. And when that moment arrived, there would be no arguing left to do. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. Neutral location, no raised voices, no family dinner table pretending to be a courtroom. Just a conference room with a long table, a pitcher of water, and paperwork already stacked neatly in front of each chair. I arrived early. Old habit, my daughter-in-law arrived last. She hesitated at the door when she saw me sitting there alone. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around. Instead, she walked in and took the seat farthest from mine. My son sat between us. That felt intentional. The woman from the office downtown entered with a folder under her arm and nodded to all of us. No small talk, no warm-up. She laid things out plainly. What had been sold, what had been recovered, what had been refunded. And what couldn't be undone. She didn't look at me when she spoke. She didn't look at my daughter-in-law either. She spoke to the documents. That's how power actually sounds. When she finished, the room went quiet. My daughter-in-law stared at the table. Her hands were clasped so tight her knuckles were white. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I swear I didn't." The woman nodded once. "That's been noted," she said. "But responsibility doesn't disappear because of that." No one argued. Then came the part my daughter-in-law hadn't expected. The boundary. Moving forward, any decisions involving the house, garage, or belongings would require my written approval. No exceptions, no assumptions, no verbal permissions filtered through anyone else. My son shifted uncomfortably. I stayed still. This wasn't a win, it was a reset. The woman closed the folder. "That concludes this matter," she said. But before we stood up, I spoke, just once. "I need to be clear about something," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This house is not a project, and my grief is not a gap for someone else to step into." No one interrupted. "I will ask for help when I need it," I continued. "Until then, nothing moves without me." I looked at my daughter-in-law. She nodded, quick, immediate. "Yes," she said, "I understand." And for the first time I believed her. Outside, my son walked beside me to the parking lot. "I should have stopped it," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting you from stress." I looked at him. "Protection doesn't mean control," I said. "It means respect." He nodded. We stood there for a moment, the air heavy but honest. At home, I opened the garage door and let it stay open for a while. Sunlight hit the shelves, the workbench, the familiar clutter that had almost disappeared. I moved one thing back into place, then another, not because it mattered where it sat, but because I decided where it went. That night I slept better than I had in months, not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was being done to me anymore. The humiliation that started in my driveway hadn't vanished. It had changed shape. It was no longer mine to carry. And the person who turned my grief into a public spectacle was finally learning what it feels like to be told no clearly and in writing. After the meeting, things didn't snap back to normal. They settled into something else. Quieter. More careful. My daughter-in-law stopped dropping by. Every visit was planned now. Texts came first. Times were confirmed. Questions were asked before decisions were even considered. That alone told me the message landed. My son checked in more, but differently. Not to manage, not to steer, just to ask how I was doing and then actually listen to the answer. That took some getting used to. The neighborhood changed too, not in a dramatic way. Just small things. People waved a little longer, stopped to talk instead of whisper. One neighbor even apologized for not knowing what to say that day in the driveway. I told her it was fine because it was. The embarrassment wasn't sticking to me anymore, it had shifted. A week later, the last unresolved item was returned. A man knocked on my door holding my husband's old circular saw. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been carrying guilt along with the tool. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "I swear I wouldn't have bought it if I knew." "I believe you," I said. He handed it over carefully like it was fragile. When I carried it back into the garage, I noticed something unexpected. Everything was back, not perfectly, but intentionally. The shelves made sense again. The workbench felt like a workspace, not a display. For the first time since my husband passed, the garage didn't feel frozen in grief or stripped bare by someone else's urgency. It felt mine. That evening, my daughter-in-law asked if we could talk, not through anyone else, not as a group. Just us. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes steady but cautious. "I crossed a line," she said. "I see that now." I waited. "I thought helping meant stepping in," she continued. "I didn't think about how it would feel." I nodded once. "That's the part people skip," I said. "The feeling." She took a breath. I won't do that again. I believed her, not because of her words, because of her restraint. After she left, I opened the metal box one last time. I checked the documents, the notes, the careful planning my husband had done without making a show of it. Then I closed it and didn't put it back on the shelf. I placed it in a drawer in my bedroom, not hidden, accessible, just in case. Weeks passed. Life resumed its shape, but something important had changed underneath it all. I no longer felt like I had to earn my place in my own home, or justify my silence, or explain my boundaries. They were simply there, clear, written, respected. The driveway stayed empty. No tables, no signs, no strangers holding pieces of a life that wasn't theirs. And every time I pulled in, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, the kind that comes from knowing nothing like that would ever happen again. What surprised me most afterward wasn't the silence, it was the restraint. My daughter-in-law didn't offer suggestions anymore, didn't rearrange, didn't comment on what should be done next. She stayed in her lane. That told me more than any apology ever could. My son started coming by on Sundays alone. Sometimes we'd drink coffee. Sometimes we'd sit without talking much at all. He didn't try to fix things anymore. He didn't rush me through grief like it was a checklist. One afternoon, he stood in the garage with me, hands in his pockets. "I forgot how much of him is in here," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "that's why it mattered." He nodded. Slowly, no arguing, no defending, just understanding, finally catching up. A few days later, the final paperwork arrived. One envelope, thin this time, no warnings, no instructions, just confirmation. Everything that could be corrected had been corrected. Everything that needed boundaries now had them. I slid the letter into the metal box and closed it for what I knew was the last time. Not because it wasn't useful anymore. Because it had done exactly what it was meant to do. The neighborhood moved on. New gossip, new distractions. But every now and then I'd catch someone glancing at my driveway a little longer than usual. Like they remembered. Like they learned something. I didn't mind. That driveway had been a lesson, just not for me. One afternoon I heard my daughter-in-law laughing outside. Real laughter this time, not the performative kind. She was talking to a neighbor, explaining something. "I didn't know," she said, "but I should have known better." I stayed inside, not hiding, just choosing not to insert myself where I wasn't needed. That's what healthy distance looks like. Later that week, she asked before moving a chair, before donating clothes, before touching anything. Each question was small. Together, they were everything. That night, I sat in the living room and realized something quietly important. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot, then fades. What I felt now was steadier. Ownership, not just of the house, not just of the garage, of my voice, of my timing, of my right to say nothing until I was ready. The humiliation that started this story didn't end with yelling or revenge or someone storming out. It ended with clarity, with systems doing what emotions couldn't, with silence being mistaken for weakness until it wasn't. My daughter-in-law learned something she'll never forget, not because I taught her, because the consequences did. And my son learned something too. That helping someone doesn't mean taking over their life. It means standing next to them while they decide. As for me, I kept the garage door open more often after that. Not to show anything off, but because I could, because the space was mine again. Because nothing in it could be touched, moved, or sold without my say. Time did what it always does. It smoothed the sharp edges, not by erasing what happened, but by putting it in its proper place. Weeks passed without incident, no surprise visits, no helpful suggestions. No quiet rearranging when my back was turned. The house stayed still in a way that felt respectful, not empty. My daughter-in-law kept her distance, but not coldly. When she spoke to me, it was direct. When she offered help, it came with an easy out. If you want, no pressure, just thought I'd ask. Those words mattered more than she probably realized. My son changed too. He stopped acting like a middleman. Stopped softening messages or explaining people's intentions before I could even respond. He trusted me to handle my own life again. That trust felt heavier than anything I'd carried in a while. One afternoon, he asked if he could keep one of his dad's tools. Just one. He didn't assume, didn't reach for it, he asked. Of course, I said. We picked it together. That moment, quiet, respectful, felt like the real correction to everything that had gone wrong. Later that day, I went through the garage one last time. Not to organize, not to sort, just to be there. I ran my hand over the workbench, picked up a screwdriver, put it back. The space didn't feel like a shrine or a storage unit anymore. It felt lived in. I realized something then. The worst part of what my daughter-in-law did wasn't selling the tools. It was deciding I was finished without asking. Finished grieving, finished choosing, finished owning. That assumption is what broke trust, and that's what had been repaired slowly, quietly, deliberately. A neighbor stopped by while I was outside. I heard everything worked out, she said carefully. It did, I replied. She hesitated, then added, you handled that with a lot of grace. I smiled. Grace is what people call it when you don't explode, but what it really was patience paired with preparation. That night I moved the metal box again, not back to the shelf, not locked away. I placed it on the closet floor beside my shoes. Visible, grounded, a reminder not of fear, of foresight. My husband had known something I didn't at the time. That love doesn't mean leaving things unprotected. That silence doesn't mean surrender. And that sometimes the strongest response is letting people reveal themselves fully before you respond at all. The driveway stayed quiet, but it wasn't forgotten. It had become a marker, a line in the story that everything else was built around. And the final piece of this story, it wasn't about paperwork or apologies. It was about what happens when someone realizes too late that the person they underestimated was never powerless to begin with. The driveway stayed quiet after that. No folding tables, no handwritten signs. No strangers drifting in and out like they belonged there. Just concrete, sunlight, and the sound of the garage door opening when I decided it would. My daughter-in-law never tried to soften what happened. She didn't joke about it later. Didn't call it a misunderstanding. She treated it like what it was, a line she crossed. My son changed too, not all at once, but in ways that mattered. He stopped stepping in to manage conversations. Stopped explaining people to me before I could speak for myself. When he asked how I was doing, he waited for the answer. That alone told me the lesson stuck. A few months later, I hosted a small dinner, nothing big. Just food, quiet voices, the kind of normal that feels earned instead of forced. At one point, my daughter-in-law stood at the garage door. She didn't step inside. She asked, "Is it okay if I grab a chair from here?" I nodded. That was it, no apology speech, no awkward laugh, just respect finally in place. After everyone left, I stood alone in the driveway where it had started. Same spot, same house, same woman standing there. But I wasn't the same person anymore. That afternoon, neighbors watching, strangers holding my husband's tools, cash changing hands, it didn't fade away. It settled, it became something useful. A reminder that silence isn't weakness. That grief doesn't cancel authority. And that people who rush to take control often miss the one detail that matters most. I never raised my voice, never grabbed anything back, never made a scene. I let paperwork speak. I let systems move. I let consequences arrive without being announced. And when it was over, I didn't celebrate. I just reclaimed my space. If this story made you stop for a second, if any moment felt uncomfortably familiar, I'd genuinely like to know which part stuck with you. Everyone connects to something different. Sharing that in the comments helps more than you might think. And if these kinds of stories stay with you, sticking around with a like or subscribe just means you won't miss the next one when it shows up. I still keep the garage the way my husband liked it. I still open the door when I want to. And nothing in my life moves anymore unless I say so, not because I demanded it. Because I learned when to be quiet and when to let the right things speak for me. One last thing before you go. There's another story on the end screen that connects directly to this one. It starts with a woman folding laundry in her own child's house and being told straight to her face, "You don't live here." She doesn't argue, she doesn't raise her voice. She picks up her keys. And later, when a stranger shows up asking for access, the panic tells you everything you need to know. If this story hit you because you've ever been made to feel small in a place you thought was safe, that one takes the lesson even deeper. It's waiting for you on the end screen.